Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Friday, June 13th. Are you superstitious? And on Fridays, we talk about human behavior and justifications. So, human beings have been drawn to live by the estuaries and the seas and the oceans probably since time immemorial. More than 2.2 billion people currently live in coastal zones worldwide, and it's estimated that as soon as 2030, that number may creep up, will more than double and may approach 5 billion people because people continue to populate the expanding coastal towns and cities, primarily in subtropical or tropical regions. In addition to the broader environmental and ecosystem effects of the oceans, they provide enormous health benefits, as I've talked about previously, especially in the form of the proteins from the fish and shellfish, as well as their omega-3 fatty acids that yield cardioprotective benefits, improved neurological functioning, and reduced risks of various cancers. And even seaweeds provide a range of healthy food products as well. And then many of our pharmaceutical products have oceanic origins. Marine organism extracts are the basis for several antibiotics and chemotherapeutic agents, along with therapeutics for the treatment of pain and cardiovascular and eye diseases and much more. And then I also discussed in Wednesday's vlog the general emotional, psychological, and physical health benefits of the oceans. And so that's all great. At the same time, however, we have to recognize that it's a two-way street. So while we benefit tremendously from the oceans, and they're vital to our very survival and existence, we also have to evaluate the impact of our own human behavior on the oceans as well, some of which, again, I discussed in yesterday's vlog. So I just going to go through a few of the major human behavioral developments that are having a direct impact on the oceans and the waterways in general. So first, we have to acknowledge the importance of overdevelopment of coastal regions and how these directly impact the marine ecosystems. There are over 20 coastal megacities now, that is, each with more than 10 million inhabitants. And in addition, there are, of course, countless other smaller cities and towns. And the concern there is the extent to which that can lead to the destruction, or at least the degradation, of coastal and nearshore habitats. So we have to be careful with our impacts, but especially in terms of our pollutants and our chemicals. And in that vein, too, we have to regulate our wastewater and sewage disposal in a much better way, much more effectively, because most of that continues to be unregulated across the globe. And then what was once simply perhaps human excrement is now a complex mixture of toxic waste, including pharmaceutical residues, personal care products, and in this day and age, recreational drugs and much more. Research over a couple of decades ago indicated that sewage pollution was generating almost 120 million cases of gastrointestinal diseases and more than 50 million cases of respiratory diseases annually. We don't have really great data up to the date, up to the minute, so to speak, so it's difficult to say reliably or as accurately as we might like what the rates are today. But nonetheless, we do know that the research has continued to show that as well, viral and bacterial and protozoan pathogens are increasingly polluting our edible fishes and shellfish again, and this is producing millions of cases of things like hepatitis and, again, other adverse health effects. And then along with that, as we've talked about previously, there are the concerns about the climate change and increasing pollution. There's a higher risk of Vibrio infections, including cholera. And the expectation is that this is going to simply increase and expand into new areas as the earth warms and as we've got these larger pools of stagnant water and warmer water, especially in the areas of Asia and Africa and South America that have natural reservoirs of warmer coastal waters. And finally, the threat of microbial resistant bacteria in marine systems, ecosystems, is also emerging as a critical health concern around the world. And then again, in terms of the human effect, we have to look at the damage that's associated with offshore oil and gas production. We know that the toxic chemicals from the drilling processes contaminate seafood, but at the same time, accidents such as major oil spills can result in long-term negative effects, as obviously as well, on the oil industry workers and their nearby communities. A notable, relatively recent example was the Deepwater Horizon drilling rig incident from 2010. Some of you may recall. More than 200 million gallons of crude oil were released into the Gulf of Mexico, along with 1.8 million gallons of chemical dispersant, severely affecting 40% of all coastal wetland in the U.S. As a result, too, seafood businesses involving shrimp and lobster, oyster, juvenile fishes, and seaweed all declined. And then the oil workers and the rescuers and coastal inhabitants were exposed to air that was polluted with carcinogenic pathogens and volatile organic compounds that were released from dispersants. And then heavy metal exposures also occurred, most notably in children. And then while there are many causes, obviously, to climate change, some non-human, there's a human element involved too. And the result of global warming not only poses a major threat to human health and well-being, but also has already severely disrupted or degraded marine ecosystems worldwide, leading to the collapse in some cases. And then at the same time, we should also note that there are potential risks associated with our own decisions to, again, overpopulate the shorelines. So one of the most dramatic reminders of that was the December 2004 Asian earthquake and tsunami that ended up killing upwards of 250,000 people in coastal areas across 13 different countries and injured at least another 500,000 more, often with long-term health consequences. And in fact, a further 150,000 people are estimated to have died from infectious diseases following the disaster. And then plus on a global basis, let's also recognize too that over 200,000 people drown each year, and more than 350,000 on average are injured each year in boating accidents. So, what's happening then in terms of long-term human behavior in relation to the oceans? And long-term behavior in general, the problem is that we're often very slow to act unless it's absolutely necessary, kind of like getting that assignment due at the end of the term and studying for that exam. But that said, the overwhelming evidence of degradation and damage in our seas and our oceans actually already led the United Nations to declare the current decade from 2021 to 2030, the decade for ocean science for sustainable development, or the ocean decades in short. Did you know that? Neither did I. Maybe I wasn't paying attention. So we have some work to do to get the word out. It's hard enough to act even if we do know that there's something afoot. But it's almost impossible to act if we're completely unaware that something's happening or that something might need our attention. So the ocean decade then has been declared with the aim of achieving 7 broad objectives. Again, this is from the UN. I'm just going to mention these briefly. A clean ocean where sources of pollution are identified, reduced, or removed. A healthy and resilient ocean where marine ecosystems are understood, protected, restored, and managed. Number 3, a productive ocean that can support a sustainable food supply and a sustainable ocean economy. 4th, a predicted ocean where society understands and can respond effectively to changing ocean conditions. 5, a safe ocean where life and livelihoods are protected from ocean-related hazards. 6, an accessible ocean with open and equitable access to data, information, technology, and innovations. And 7, and finally, an inspiring and engaging ocean where society understands and values the ocean in relation to human well-being and sustainable development. Well, that all sounds great. These are just incredibly general, to be sure, And the problems that we're facing are incredibly large and interconnected, just like the oceans themselves. But I want to look at it this way and offer a note of optimism, if you will. So, for example, when we first started to develop large-scale towns, right, where many hundreds of thousands of people, even millions of people, finally, were no longer connected directly to the land as farmers, or in earlier iterations of human development as horticulturalists or hunter-gatherers, we had to figure out and solve a number of problems, didn't we? We had to learn, for example, how to create healthier and safer environments, and we weren't always great at it. There's a great video I was looking at not too long ago about how we wouldn't have survived even a day in medieval times because of the conditions and the foods that were available, etc. So in a general sense, we figured a lot of those problems out, didn't we? So look at our current towns and cities. So for all of our complaints and ongoing problems, some obviously quite justified, we did figure out how to do a lot of things right. We figured out how to create safer roadways and transit routes. We figured out how to create these effective supply chains, how to bring foods in abundance, how to bring clean water to countless millions of people, and how to dispose of our waste in safer and healthier ways. We also learned how to vaccinate and take other public health precautions to lower the incidence of many diseases and sicknesses, and so much more. I could go on, endlessly about all the things and all the problems that we did a pretty good job of solving so that we could live by the millions together in these more urban environments. I mean, I'm not saying that we always necessarily want to do that. And again, part of the point of the vlogs this week is that there's so many benefits to accessing the green spaces, but I've been focusing mostly on the blue spaces this week. But my point is that when we put our minds to it, we're a pretty smart creature. Okay? Just look at what we did, for example, with things like smoking and seatbelts. When I was growing up, the clear majority of adults smoked cigarettes or pipes and that sort of thing, and seatbelts were entirely voluntary. There were no seatbelt laws. Then what happened? Well, we studied these issues and we figured out the risks that were involved in both of the behaviors. And guess what happened? What did we do? Well, we implemented these incredibly effective public information campaigns. We incorporated the knowledge into key learning modules in our educational systems. We taught our children about these issues in a much earlier age. And we passed laws and regulations, if nothing else, to force people to comply. So again, when I started to drive or became old enough, I hated I've got to wear a seatbelt now. I was never used to that, right? But I remember vividly some of the information that I learned in the lessons from our driver's ed course. I still remember the acronym IPDE: Identify, Predict, Decide, and Execute. So if you want to be a good driver, right? But my point is, it's not being stupid. Even though I was a dopey teen, I quickly realized the statistical data, the information that I was learning about, overwhelmingly favored wearing seatbelts to reduce the likelihood or the probability of death or serious injury dramatically if one ends up in an accident or at higher speeds in particular. And so while I didn't like the behavioral change initially, I quickly made the cognitive shift. And I did it partly in a fun way. I actually remember this. I remember being at an amusement park as a teenager. And I was thinking about, I don't know, whatever. We were having a conversation. It came up something about wearing seatbelts. And I remember doing this kind of thought experiment. What would happen if I didn't wear the seatbelt on this particular roller coaster? I'd go flying. So yeah, of course I put my seatbelt on, right? And it came just naturally. It was second nature. Well, of course you're going to do that, And that's exactly what I thought about. Well, gosh, why wouldn't I do the same thing with the seatbelt? Of course I did that. And by the way, the same thing happened when I looked at the data for drinking and driving. It wasn't a problem on my end because I was never a substance user or drinker and driver and all that sort of. In fact, I was always the designated driver as a teenager and in university and so on. But the point is I looked at the data and I said, well, that's, obvious. Clearly, you shouldn't be drinking and driving or using other substances or driving while distracted for that matter, like holding a cell phone. I looked at that data early on, and the results, again, were clear and consistent and unequivocal. Okay, don't drink and drive, don't use other controlled substances while driving, and don't be holding your cell phone or texting while driving. Of course, people still do that, right? But my point is that, it didn't take a genius to say, well, that doesn't seem like a really smart idea, right? So I don't do any of those things. And you probably don't either. Most people don't. Some people do. All right, so back to the oceans. I'm optimistic in the sense that I do think human beings can be incredibly intelligent and innovative in our thinking. When we're able to put two and two together, set politics aside, set idiocy aside, set cults aside, all that stuff. But when we're able to just focus on what's in front of us and put two and two together, again, as easily as I could do, as I said, even as a dopey teenager, we are able to figure things out and usually make rational decisions and even changes in our lives. And I see the same possibilities then with the oceans. There are countless opportunities to intervene more directly in terms of public education, in terms of sharing the latest information and research, sharing what's incredibly obvious and compelling. Again, I'm not saying that's going to appeal to everybody, but there are things where you can readily get 90, 95, maybe even 99% of the population on board with really good evidence and information, okay? And so if we're able to do that, we can initiate discussions and create behavioral changes. And yes, we can also then create and enforce laws and regulations to help those individuals and organizations along who might be a little bit more reluctant to change their ways. So we have a lot of tools in our toolboxes, okay? The biggest challenge, though, always seems to involve getting enough people on board, or the general public, to ensure that we can then press for meaningful change at that broader societal level or public level in general. And that's where we have to confront, in my view, the two biggest challenges that are ongoing in the world that we live in today, 2025. So we have the challenge on the one hand of global capitalism. And what I mean by that, I'm not trying to be a Marxist radical or whatever. All I'm talking about is the problem of the logic of unfettered growth and corporate greed, where there's a lot of people making a lot of money off of hurting or exploiting others or destroying and exploiting our environments. So that's something that we all have to be concerned about, no matter what our political persuasions and so on. And then the second big problem, in my view, is getting elected representatives who are informed and intelligent and genuinely committed to serving the public good. I do think they're out there. We've got a few of them right around where I live for sure. But the point is that there's a problem in this day and age because so many of the politicians can be or are bought off by the lobbyists, or they're serving their corporate overlords rather than the public good. So in future vlogs on human behaviors and justifications, I'm going to address these two issues. That is corporate greed issue and electing competent government officials. But I'm going to do that in a broader and a more systemic way. So I'm not going to focus more on that today. So for now, let's just start by learning as much as we can and sharing that knowledge with our loved ones and those perhaps in our immediate social networks. That's a good place to start. And it's not hard. And so much of the best information can be shared so readily and communicated these days so effectively. And even more effectively, I would argue, than what we could do back in the day when we were, maybe ignoring or not getting all the information about the negative effects of smoking or not wearing our seatbelts. So, to be clear and to be fair, some people obviously are still going to choose to smoke. I get it. Some people are going to refuse to wear their seatbelts. Some people are just going to toss their garbage by the side of the road. You're never going to get everybody, to comply and agree with everything 100%. But I do honestly believe, and from the evidence that I've seen, and I'll explain that with one other factoid in a moment, but from everything that I've seen over the years, we have figured out how to get people to make more informed or healthier choices on balance. Again, not everybody, but on balance and in terms of the general population. And then we also have figured out that, it's a good idea to create some laws and enforce at least some informal social norms that help promote healthier choices. And that can serve as kind of a backup system as well. Okay? And guess what? The cumulative effects of all of this learning and education and public health initiatives and laws and regulations. Again, we don't all agree with each other on every law, every regulation, every public health initiative, and so on. But what's the cumulative effects of all of this knowledge and all of these experts and people who've been working in these different fields for decades? Well, the cumulative effect is that we are living, it's not an accident that we're living 30 years longer today than we were a century ago. Okay? On average. So again, kicking and screaming at times, when we figured out, maybe we should do this or do that. Maybe I should change. Maybe I should quit smoking. On balance, the cumulative effect of most of us doing these things has been that we are living longer lives and healthier lives for the most part. And we're aging now, many of us, to the point where we can continue to have a high quality of life, even in our advanced years. Again, that's not to say that there aren't still some, sticky problems, especially around dietary issues, cardiovascular disease, issues of dementia as we're getting older, and so on and so forth. But my point is that we're not a stupid people. We're not a stupid species. Don't let anybody convince you of that. Or don't look on the news and say, oh, yeah, we really are stupid. I know it can get discouraging. Instead, I want to say or suggest and propose that honestly, we are not stupid. Okay? Even if we have to be forced at times to change our habits here and there. But I think enough of us learned enough good lessons so that we really did start to change how we do things, and we really are living healthier and longer lives. But now we're confronted with new problems. So we're going to have to apply that knowledge and our intelligence in new ways and apply that to the concerns that we have then about the oceans and about the broader issues that are confronting us. We've always done that, literally for thousands of years, generation after generation. We've been making progress, in my view, okay? And if all else fails, at some point we realize, well, we have no choice. We are going to have to make a change or two, all right? But again, we've already started in so many ways. We'll do other vlogs and talk about some of these other issues, but when I was growing up, we hardly talked about recycling at all. We hardly talked about groundwater contamination. That was a big thing that I was bothered about as a little kid. What are we going to do with the water? And so many other issues. But yeah, a lot of smart people have been working on these issues for a long time. And we know a lot more. And now we have the means to spread the good information. If we can just keep the bad information at bay and get people to work together on these issues, I still have the ultimate faith in humanity. We can do just about anything. All right. That's it for today. As ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And tomorrow we'll have a little bit of fun with sports and humor and my last vlog in relation to the oceans and water. And then we'll go on to a new theme starting on Sunday, which I'll revealed then. So stay tuned. Hope to see you soon.